I'm not sure how you all feel about the day, but I feel like it's been a really powerful representation of the strength and opportunity we have with this technology. Grateful to be joined today with a strong team of panelists here. I know I've referenced them several times today. I want to allow them to introduce themselves, but grateful for the opportunity that we have to be here to explore what does it look like and what should it look like as we move forward in the space of research, evaluation, regulation, and want to give the full spectrum from those doing the research, those doing the regulation, also to those who are impacted by this at the clinical level. So with that, I want to start with Dr. Chris Fowler on the end. If you want to introduce yourself, we'll get started.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. My name is Chris Fowler. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I'm a health science specialist at the Tampa VA, where in addition to my independent work in virtual reality for pain management and also some work in stroke rehabilitation, our team does a lot of work in whole health and complementary and integrative health and implementing electronic data collection platforms for things like whole health and pain management.
My name is Ryan Beams. I'm at the FDA, so I'm the program coordinator for our medical extended reality program, dealing with a lot of the research for the evaluation of medical devices using XR.
I'm Walter Greenleaf. I'm a research scientist, behavioral neuroscientist, currently at Stanford University, but I spend a lot of my time working as a translating scientist, taking academic work and moving it out into the early stage business field. I've had the opportunity to start 4 medical product businesses, and I'm so impressed by what's going on here. As you know, I got involved in virtual reality back in 1987, so for me it's been a really wonderful time to see things get to the point where we are, where things are about to blast off even further.
Hi, I'm Susan Persky. I am a behavioral scientist at the National Institutes of Health, where I'm in the Genome Institute, and I direct the immersive simulation program, basically live and breathe research with and without XR.
Awesome, thank you. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Ann Bailey. I'm a pharmacy practitioner who's grown up in the VA, but currently the immersive technology lead for VA, and get to be a part of this work. I'm very grateful for the community that's been built both within VA and beyond, as you can see by those represented on the stage. So just to get us started, it's a very simple question, but also could be very lengthy or very complicated potentially, depending on how you answer. But why immersive technology? We'll start again with you, Chris.
Thank you. I actually inherited my work in virtual technology originally. I came to the Tampa VA on fellowship, and my fellowship mentor, Dr. Sandra Winkler, had a body of work that didn't get funded, and she ultimately was like, hey, do you want to take this over? So as an ambitious young fellow, I said yes, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're in that position. And that was a very cool experience, and I think it was just I was very interested when we started actually getting into the clinic and working with people and seeing things happen that I did not expect to happen with technology, even with the technology background, and the veterans' reactions and positive responses to it.
So my journey, I started actually in optics. That's my background, is optical physics. So initially I was doing a lot of imaging and different research involving that, and then with kind of a lot of the uptick and a lot of the research and development that was going on in immersive technology, I saw a lot of opportunities to take some of the optics experience that I had and translate that into a new field and try to understand how to evaluate these new technologies.
I think I'm going to reinterpret your question as opposed to why I got involved in VR. I think I talked a little bit about that yesterday, to more why is VR so amazing? And just to be very succinct to the point, is because you can do things in healthcare that you otherwise cannot do. And also, I think it's going to be the organizing technology that so many other emerging technologies are coming into healthcare. Wearable sensors, machine learning and analytics, interpretation of subtle information that indicate our cognitive and our mood state. So much is going on that is going to converge into VR as an enabling platform to address otherwise very difficult problems to treat in healthcare. So that's, for me, that's why, because I think this is for the next decade, this is going to be where the action is.
And Yeah, I got into VR when I was looking at grad school, looking to go into a PhD program for social psychology, very interested in how people were using this newfangled internet chat to talk to each other. But as I was sort of looking at programs, I met Jim Blaskovich, who was one of the pioneers in using virtual reality to study social phenomenon. And so that's where I ended up doing my graduate work, did my dissertation on violent video games and virtual reality and aggression. This was back in 2004, so really not relevant for a very, very long time, now relevant, and got recruited to NIH to sort of apply those skills as a research methodologist, really, and have been there and built my career there ever since.
I appreciate that. Just so you all know, prior to coming up here on stage, I did ask if there was anything off that I could not ask. All of them graciously said no. I even asked about embarrassing stories. They all said I could ask embarrassing stories. I won't. I'll spare you. There's too much collective knowledge on the stage right now, but if we have extra time, maybe we'll get into that. Walter, I want to go back to one of your statements about one of the things that really excites you about immersive technology is how it can address some of the gaps or previously unmet needs. Could you expound on that a little bit more?
Well, that's worthy of a long discussion, but I'll try and be brief. I think in one way it's because we can create an experience and measure things that we otherwise cannot easily measure. I think in order to measure someone's cognitive processes or their emotional reaction to a stimulus, or to teach them how to manage a reaction to a stimulus, we need to be able to evoke a situation. If I ask you, what's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, and please let's think about it and talk about it, you're not going to want to go there, or if you go there, you're going to go too far. But if I can gradually expose you to that, if I can measure objectively how you're processing the information, if I can challenge you with a challenge, maybe it might be an activity of daily living, or it might be solving a social problem or solving an issue, or whatever. We can use virtual environments to evoke a response and measure that response in an objective way. And for the field of behavioral medicine, that is a very powerful thing to be able to do. But also for physical therapy, occupational therapy, we can create functionally environments that measure you in an ecologically correct way, as opposed to something that is not necessarily there. And then we can reduce time and space and take what otherwise we rely on our imagination to do as part of medicine. And we can motivate people by making the experiences very engaging and provide feedback. So there are so many things that we can do that help us with new tools to address anxiety, depression, autism, Asperger's, addictions, so many of the difficult problems that we've been trying to address, and connecting people. I mean, the list just goes on. I said I would try and be brief. I'm afraid I wasn't, but you get the idea. There's a lot that we can do that we otherwise cannot do without this technology.
What I hear you saying, and this is far too succinct, but is we can take what's currently very subjective and make it much more objective.
Absolutely.
Ryan, I've had the opportunity to see your lab at the FDA, which was really fascinating to me because it's a very different looking space than what we might see obviously at our healthcare systems or in our offices. So could you talk a little bit about what's important from your perspective as a regulator, as a research scientist, thinking about how we're regulating these devices or leaning into how we might regulate these devices? What's important for you, for us to know?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll try to be brief also because that's a pretty long one. So there's a few different aspects that I tend to think about with these. So one, I really like what Susan said in her talk. It's actually a term I use a lot, is thinking about these as being enabling technologies. And what makes that kind of tricky or interesting from a regulatory science standpoint is they're being applied over such a wide range of different application spaces. And what you need to consider as far as the performance is going to be different depending on the application. That's not too shocking. And so to give some examples, of course, there's application. There's also thinking about clinician-facing, patient-facing, what's the usage environment. And then another part that makes it, I think, kind of interesting and challenging is, because a lot of us in this room are aware, a lot of the companies that are developing medical devices are not making the hardware. And so then they're using someone else's platform. They turn over very quickly, they change very quickly, and how do you keep pace with that? So anyway, that's kind of the framework of where we get started. And so what we really are focusing on within our research program is trying to develop agnostic test methods that we can apply across a wide range of devices, testing them out on a lot of devices, publishing papers on it, and then developing those into what we're calling regulatory science tools, getting them out into the public so that then if, say, there's a medical device company that's saying, oh, we want to do an application focused on this, they have a lot of those resources available for them. They can follow along with our procedures, use a lot of the software we're developing, and then hopefully that lowers the barrier a little bit for them. So that's really what we're focusing on. So it's kind of two hats. We help with the review process, and then we also develop the tools and methods that companies can use when they're testing things.
That's really helpful, thank you. Chris, looking to you now, as you've been researching, you're also practicing clinically, what are some of the lessons you've learned as you've evaluated these technologies, either about how you evaluate or what you mentioned you found things that you didn't expect to find?
Quick correction. I don't practice clinically.
Oh, okay.
And that's actually
Not as a practicing clinician.
Yeah, but that's actually, I think that will come up in question 5. So one of the things that I would really say is I'm becoming more and more interested in a lot of the human factors that I think I didn't anticipate with VR. And I think one of the ways that really started is I can really kind of remember in a situation where we used it as an adjunct to physical therapy. And a veteran comes up to me, and it's a shared block of time, and says, oh, I love this, this is great, that same feedback that we're all used to using VR. And then he goes, I use this to get out of physical therapy. And I'm just like, oh no, like that is the exact opposite of what we want this technology to do. Or just talking to people and learning things about getting veteran experiences and saying, hey, I'm in this lovely scenic variety. Can we shut off the music because I want to actually experience the scenery? And other factors that I think I would have just never thought about if I didn't actually have casual conversations outside of the research space, which I think are as illuminating as anything that I've seen within it.
Susan, what have you seen in getting to more visibility on what VA is doing and how VA is thinking about evaluation processes and things are growing really quickly from the field? As someone who is looking from that research lens, what are some things you're excited about and also some things you want us to be more mindful of or cautious about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, seeing it grow and seeing the mindful way it's grown in the VA has been really exciting. As Walter's kind of said, as somebody who's been in the field for a while, it's coming. It's actually here. It's really exciting. And I think, evidence generation is important, but it's also individual experiences are important. And one thing I don't think I appreciated early on, is sort of how different every individual is and the faster we can get to figuring out what works for who and how to figure that out off the bat. I think the more we'll be able to really realize all the potential benefits that we have. Of course, we can't start there. Right. We don't have the data yet, but I feel like this actual, sort of clinical use in line with all of the data collection capabilities that are starting to come online is going to be a really exciting opportunity to leverage some of that to start to figure out how we can work towards personalized medicine, personalized treatment in some of these areas. Because when literally everything is possible in VR, how do you figure out which direction to go? We can start in the directions that seem to help the most people, but at the end of the day, how to also take into account all of our own differences.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a great question. With that, Ryan, I'm going to come back to you. What are some unique challenges when you think about immersive technology in the regulatory space?
So I think I touched on a number of them, but I think a lot of it is that it's being used across such a wide range of applications. And then also just the pace of development. And then, so for instance, you could have a company that say they have an idea for a medical device, they develop it for particular hardware, they go through a clinical trial, they go through the FDA, they're ready to go to market, the device is discontinued. So that's not a great spot to be. So one thing that I'm personally really interested in is trying to push to the point that we have a better understanding of how to have like more consistent specifications for headsets. So like for instance, if you look up, this one has this many pixels and this one has this many, it actually tells you almost nothing about what your experience is going to be. So being able to bring down that barrier and have more consistency between the devices, I think would help a lot with that. And then also just, I think, continuing to partner with like the VA and other groups to get that after the devices are on the market, to get that post-market data on what are the challenges, what are the issues, so that we can try to further improve how we handle the regulatory process.
Absolutely. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have right now to do some of those post-marketing evaluations. If VA is able to contribute, we have a 14-site pilot right now that we're working with FDA to think about what does it look like now that it's actually out in the wild of actual clinical practice. So I know you touched on this a little bit on your talk earlier, so we'll come back to you. But Chris, what do you see as a researcher, not a clinician? Why is research important? Why does it matter if we know these technologies are relatively low risk, patients like them, clinicians will use them? Why does research matter?
I think, well, one reason I think is kind of going back to the example that I had just given, where when we can learn things like if the veteran is using technology that they enjoy to avoid an adjunctive treatment that it's meant to complement. Because I think that's really hard, right? Because if they're supposed to complement one another, because my vision is that the VR is something that the veteran can go home with, they can expand their treatment, but if they're sort of ignoring that initial treatment to begin with, that's sort of information that we want to know, because maybe they're not learning the full lessons to actually maximize care. I loved what you said, Ryan. I loved about coming up with some of those agnostic themes and cross-cutting themes, because that is one of the biggest barriers you highlighted, is that the technology can often become out of date by the time you even publish a paper, which has happened to me before. So I think coming up with some of those more novel cross-cutting ways to evaluate this technology, I think, is essential for the future.
That's incredibly helpful. I think one of the things we want to make sure in VA that we are not just charging ahead with excitement and enthusiasm without having appropriate boundaries and asking questions and what do we need to be mindful of. So I really appreciate the expertise and thoughts on this panel of how we think through what maybe we haven't thought about before. How do we anticipate the unexpected? How do we know what we don't know? I think are some of those questions. But over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll start with you, Susan, and then we'll go across this way. But over the next 3 to 5 years, how do you envision, keeping in mind the research that we need to do and regulation that will certainly come into play, but how do you see this changing the way we think about healthcare, the way we deliver healthcare, the way our patients, our staff experience healthcare in general?
I mean, I think a lot of it probably could be really an extension of all of the remote care we've seen over the pandemic and continuing. I think some of the ultimate hope is that, some of these maybe multi-user even environments could be a platform to engage in care that can be done remotely, that can be done maybe with multiple people, to sort of engage more people in the healthcare process together. We're not going to probably end up going to our sort of yearly physical online, which is probably a good thing. But I think sort of longitudinal engagement in the healthcare system, even remotely with the technology, can also enable a lot of data collection, along with sensors and all kinds of other technologies coming online that can really help us and help our providers know more about us. So really it's the sort of, I'm not going to say the metaverse, I said the metaverse word, but it's this sort of coming together of all the technologies, probably in a specialized way. 3 to 5 years is maybe a little bit too soon for this, but I think any movement towards that could be a really important way to start, understanding our health a little bit better.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I'd like to foist upon you a concept. I view you and your team and Susan and the rest of the VA ecosystem, you're basically iconoclast. This is a time of great change in healthcare as the consumer electronic companies like Apple, Google, and Samsung, and then companies like Amazon and Walmart get more involved in healthcare with clinical devices that we might wear on our wrist. It's a time of great change, and building upon Beth's description of this being sort of the Cambrian explosion time where there's a lot of white space opportunity, I think there's also been a lot of paralysis out there. Our friends in the pharma industry who have been stalled out in coming up with new drugs related to neurodegenerative disease, for example. It's been a slow process, and they haven't put as much funding in as they would have otherwise because they've had ambiguous results. And part of that is because they've been relying upon subjective reports of paper and pencil test and self-report. But now, with new technology coming out, which is finding a fantastic home here, a very fertile soil, I think you are going to be knocking down the pillars that are holding up the old institutions which have become a bit need to be ripped down and redone. I think what is being done here is going to make a big difference in healthcare at large. So I think healthcare is changing anyhow because of the new technologies coming in and the new shifting landscape. It's no longer just pharma and medical device and insurance and healthcare networks. It's also going to be the electronics, consumer electronics groups and others coming in. And with that change, you're ahead of the curve in terms of bringing new, well thought out, well validated applications. And it's going to be, I think, the center of gravity for this new change. So so I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be very busy, but you're going to accomplish some things you're going to be very proud of.
No pressure.
And you're going to make Ryan work all the harder.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the points that were covered are great ones. I think the devices are being applied to such a wide range. It's a little hard for me to think what all of those options are going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years. I think we'll probably start seeing increased level of adoption. Like I was thinking this morning that, rewinding a few years ago, if I mentioned FDA and AR/VR, people just kind of looked at me funny. And now, sometimes you see commercials where doctors or nurses or someone else is wearing a headset doing something. So it's getting more and more into the public sphere. So I think we're going to see a lot more adoption. And I think for us, one of the things that's going to be, exciting and a lot of work is trying to keep pace with all those changes and those new application areas that's sitting here today maybe we haven't thought about.
It into a research question, but what in your mind are outstanding questions that you would like to see us start to try to answer in the next 6 to 12 months? So the question I would love to see us lean into, and we've talked about it a few times here already, is I've gone back and forth about whether or not to share this piece of the puzzle, but my oldest brother is a veteran who died by suicide. And I can tell you, I worked at the VA at the time, it was not that long ago, and I knew all the VA resources, and I still could not figure out exactly how to connect him to the right resources that he would receive and respond to. But one of the things he said to me at one point was, I feel alone, and I don't feel as connected to anyone as I did when I was in the military or when I was in high school. So that's why you'll hear me talk a lot about peer-to-peer support. How do we connect veterans to other veterans, whether they're enrolled in VA or not? How do we connect veterans to veterans? So I would love to see us start to dive into, lean into that question. Is there a way that we can leverage this technology rather than isolating people? Because that's not exactly what we're seeing in VA. We're actually seeing it help connect people to people. Are we able to actually extend that into the community of veterans to connect veterans to veterans who will then help veterans get the care that they need? Will it be that bridge and that first step? That's a question I'd love to see us start to lean into. So.
Sure. And this is something that we've talked about before, but, oftentimes when programs like this start, the people who show up knocking at the door are the people who are sort of the, happy to be the early adopters and happy to get their heads in headsets. And I think one of the questions that is probably somewhat still lingering is sort of who's not coming to the table and how do we reach those folks, and, what are the ways that we can think about any concerns they have and address those concerns, and so on. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about is, whose voices have we not heard, who is not interested, and why?
The question I think would be very important to move everything forward, and I know you're already working on it, is we need to, in addition to standing up amazing applications and validating through research their efficacy, we also have to understand their impact in terms of a very busy clinic, a very busy healthcare ecosystem. We know in theory that more effective interventions and assessments and follow-up will reduce costs, but we need to make sure the equipment we're deploying, the systems we're deploying to do that are designed to not be intrusive, and that they are indeed, we need to demonstrate efficacy and cost savings, and make sure that the groups that we're working with, as we help them bring new technology into the healthcare system, designed for that. It's a design criteria that should be there. And I have to briefly answer your question, which is, I think we're going to see, one of the things that's been missing in virtual reality technology is because of processor speeds and other restrictions is effective multi-user virtual worlds. We have some out in the demo area, but things are going to get much better very soon. So I think, and again, our friends in the consumer electronics and the gaming industry are building upon this, but with cloud-based rendering and machine learning and analytics and NLP and ways to have non-player characters that can answer questions that could be post-discharge. I think there's a way we can do a better job of reaching people wherever they are and whoever they are, whatever demographic group they have. And generative AI will help us come up with the right cultural and age-appropriate context. I think we will have a venue for people to meet and support each other. But again, we have to be proactive and let people know what to design for.
Yeah, so there's two things that come to my mind. One ties in very nicely with what they were mentioning. I think it's important to think about like the entire process. So starting from hardware, the development, the content, rolling it into clinics, and then what all the interoperability challenges are there, and the entire system. Because that's definitely something I've heard from clinicians is once, okay, they want to have this device in their clinic, how do they get it into their workflow? How do they interface it with everything else they have going on? So I think the VA is at a pretty unique spot to be able to tackle those kind of problems and tackle them in a lot of different sites. So it's not just, okay, this hospital does it this way, but in a really broad sweeping sense. So that's one I think that would be great. I'm not sure that you can do that in 6 months, but you guys always say yes, though. The other one that I'm really interested in is trying to build stronger connections between the device and the clinical outcomes. And that could be as far as the content, it could be the performance, it could be the test methods that are done, but how do those relate to patient outcomes and clinical performance? That one's pretty hard, so we can wait till you finish the first one.
We can just get started.
I've actually kind of wondered that myself, the relationship between the device and the outcomes. Free idea to anybody who wants it. I really would have liked to see, like, if you're doing a pain app, have the 0 to 10 pain scale pop up on the VA screen and you touch the button. As a measurement nerd, I'm kind of thinking, like, how do we get these cumbersome scales? Let's get them into VR. I thought that would be really cool. Our team at Tampa, we have a whole health project looking at veteran caregivers. So I've been thinking about caregivers a lot in the last year, and it's actually really been a logistical nightmare, not gonna lie, just because caregivers are so associated with the veteran, but sort of in a VA gray area. Yet we're just learning so much about all the help they need, especially the rural caregivers that we're targeting specifically. And I would actually like to see more work in that space because I think that this is a group of people that can really benefit from VR because they don't have access to care and they don't really have access to VA benefits. So targeting them for trials, I think, could also be a good use case for VR for a lot of the things that are being discussed here. Burnout, stress and anxiety reduction, fostering, pairing them with other people and fostering sense of community. VR can do all of that.
I think that's a great opportunity. We have a great opportunity with recently changing our mission statement to include caregivers and families to be more clearly, to show how it's not just a change in the words, but it's actually change in how we're delivering care. So I think that's a great opportunity. We'd love to work together. Let's talk more about that. Next, I'm going to ask question number 3. But while you're thinking about question number 3, yes, question number 3. While you're thinking about question number 3, when they answer question number 3, then we're going to pass you all the mic to ask questions. You have on the stage here NIH, FDA, academic affiliates with Stanford, clinical researchers, lots of opportunity to learn more and also pose things that maybe we haven't thought about. So give you a chance to think about that. And then I want to make this question optional, and you can answer however and whenever you see fit. But what do you see VA's role in all of this being?
Great question. I would say when I started doing this around 2017, the VA had basically zero development in VR regarding apps for different conditions for what in my area of chronic pain. There was earlier applications for PTSD and things like that that were well documented, but there was not a lot of development happening, and a lot of that development was happening through operational and research partners and the private sector, and that is all good, and I like that. And at the same time, I think some of us have also, who've worked with IRBs and things like that, have had to go through a lot of justification processes when we're bringing in a lot of these external technologies. So the more I think that the VA, I think, can bring in their own programmers and designers to design veteran-centric apps, I think we'll be in a great place.
Yeah, I can go next. So I think it ties into some of the stuff I've mentioned already. So I think from like an FDA standpoint, a lot of the pilots you guys are doing, I think that's a tremendous resource. And so as a device goes through the FDA and then goes out into the market, getting that post-market data that'll help us improve what we're doing, the questions we're asking companies, and also the research that we're doing to try to be ready so that then next time maybe those kind of questions don't need to be addressed in a pilot. We knew them from the start and can just streamline the process. So that's, I think from my perspective, the biggest area that I see the VA helping with the regulatory side.
I guess the one phrase I would say is to the VA's role in research and in other areas is to be the standard bearer. I think you are in a strong position and already are leading the charge to say, this is how to take this emerging technology, which has tremendous value and potential that is being used by other early adopters other places, but you bring it into your enterprise and you're also improving it with your feedback and suggestions, and you are addressing some of the hard issues of interoperability, data standards, interfacing with EMRs. I think you're also in a position to say, this is what we need. This is how things could be better, because you are taking with many amazing people in your whole ecosystem giving you feedback. I think you're in a position to say, in addition to the wonderful things that we've brought in and we've deployed and we've made great use of, and we've given you feedback in academic groups and outside organizations, this is what we have as a hard problem. We think the technology can solve, and this is how we think it should be done. So I think you're in a position to really lead the charge, make it happen, and make a big difference in terms of this adoption. And medicine sometimes needs to lurch forward. There's a certain amount of appropriate inertia that's there. But again, right now, outside groups are coming in changing medicine. That's happening from the outside. And I think you're in a position to shape that rather than have it happen to you.
Everything Walter said as usual. But also, I think one of the really big benefits is sort of the comprehensiveness of the VA. And what I mean by that is often we'll do a clinical trial, maybe we'll have a 3-month follow-up, and maybe we'll rely primarily on patient-reported outcomes, which are very important. But sort of the longitudinal relationship and the ability to sort of capture some of these things in the health record could provide a really amazing way to look at how XR interventions can perform over time in the context of somebody's sort of real health care unfolding over a lifetime. So I just think the potential that's in that longitude, and I recognize sometimes people get cared in the community and things like that, and it's not that simple, but I just think that is a tremendous resource.
I really appreciate that. I think that's a great point. I hope someone's recording this. Just kidding. We've been recording the whole thing. So, all right. Now I'm going to hand it to you guys to ask questions. If you have a question, please stand up, introduce yourself, where you're from, and then we'd love to field questions.
Hey, I'm Liz Williams from Gulf Coast Veterans Healthcare System. I have a question about home use. So VA is obviously close to cracking the code to get VR headsets in the homes of veterans. As we get closer to that and then take that step, what from the research perspective do you think is most important and different for us to focus on in validating virtual reality use in the home?
So I can start with that. I'm involved in a couple of clinical trials that involve home use. And I think a couple things have surprised me a little bit. Certainly you need to get people onboarded and sort of figure things out. But one of the big values from a research perspective is certainly the longitudinal aspect of the data and allowing people to use the device in ways that they would, right, in their real life. They are in their real lives. Getting the data back is not so simple, and it's something I think we need to work on, but it is also, we have to think about once these things leave maybe a direct healthcare context or maybe an IRB context, who has access to the data, where the data go, there's all kinds of issues sort of bound up in that. So I think there are things we need to figure out. But I think it has been a tremendous opportunity to understand how people can use these things over time in their own space, and again, sort of who benefits the most, and what kind of support we need to be giving people to ensure that they're able to achieve the goal.
I would say, I think that's a great question. I think that there's two things that I have thought about a lot. One is how much of an understanding we can gain of how our veterans and patients respond to what's that validity, what's that similarity between what they learn in clinics and VR for translating to the home. And because I really think that is going to be a big research question that sometimes does get taken for granted. We can teach people effective coping mechanisms. We can see that they even like it and they enjoy doing it when they're at the hospital, when they're in session, but it doesn't always translate to the home. And I think VR is such an ideal vehicle to have different apps that can facilitate that learning in the veteran's home environment. So I think that is going to be such a big spot for VR in the future, is that translational capability for coping mechanisms for different illnesses.
Hi. Were you going to continue to respond?
Let me just quickly say that I think it's important to have technology at the home if we're going to do preventative care, and if we're also, we need to motivate people to exercise, and we need to identify if they're in distress, et cetera. So we need to have something at the home, and also post-discharge for rehab and pain management. There's so many reasons, so we have to do it, and we are doing it. You are doing it.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Nunez, newly with SimLearn. We're all hearing and feeling the buzz around these technologies, and we've mentioned many times that it's going to be exploding. And whenever we are at the precipice of something big like that, sometimes because we're so excited, we may not be thinking about unintended consequences of implementation. So just a thought about ethical dilemmas that we might encounter over time, and have we thought about maybe including an ethicist in some of the work groups that are bringing this kind of work forward?
Let me comment very, very quickly, I think that is such an important question, and I think one of the problems we've seen with some of the social applications that have been out there, which were not designed with downstream effects considered. They said, let's get something out and let's get it in use and build numbers of people on our platform. Nobody thought to design, will this cause teenage girls to be depressed because they're not feeling liked? And so we need to, as we move things out, I think it's incumbent upon us to think of the downstream consequences, and either when we design things, design looking for unintended consequences. We also have to, of course, design for diversity and inclusiveness and data accuracy, and there's so many other things, but ethics, incredibly important, and I assume that's a big part of what you're doing.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question, and something that including ethics in the governance process is really important as well. And then also learning from, I know that's something we've talked about all together at different times, but learning from previous implementations of technology or processes, learning from what was done wrong, lessons learned basically, and continuing to be mindful and ask that question along the way, keeping it at the forefront, I think is really important. So thank you for asking that.
I guess I'll just say that this is a really active area for XR, not just in healthcare, but sort of writ large across a lot of verticals. And I think it's important, and I think it's happening, that these communities kind of talk together and think about, because it's not just healthcare, right? We sort of bridge healthcare and wellness, and, it all starts to get bundled together. And so there are so many ethical areas and issues that are being discussed. But I think to be really cliche, not just in our silos, and it's sort of important to think about this for the technology sort of across all of these areas.
And there is a .org that is focused on XR safety, and XRSI done a lot of work of looking at all aspects of data privacy and inclusiveness, et cetera.
Brad here with Business 16 Fayetteville. I'm just curious if you guys have any research or things that you guys can speak to for cross-utilization with like TENS units, modalities for E-stem ultrasound, short-wave dialthermy, things where you guys are using VR in conjunction with other products.
They're all looking at me to answer that question. I can comment, or you all are the panelists? Anybody? Go for it.
Yes. There is incorporation of other technology into virtual environments. We try to leverage the built environment, and especially with AR, we can do that. We also, there's bicycles you can exercise on that have a virtual reality experience to help motivate people to do what they need to do there. In terms of TENS units and things like that, I think there's been interfaces in the form of maybe having a way to indicate where your pain is and help the clinician understand where to apply a device. But the whole movement of wearable sensors with analytics is starting to be incorporated into headsets. HP built the OmniSet headset, which has so many sensors built into it and analytics, but other groups are building, and Apple with this predictive analytics for eye gaze, and other groups coming in. I think we're going to see things being, again, I think the hub for a lot of devices and other therapeutic interventions is going to be VR, and we can see that with some of the physical therapy, occupational therapy systems that are out there too.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. So I mentioned, I'm in the medical extended reality research program, but we also have other research programs. So we have one that's focused on wearables. We have one that's focused on interoperability. And we have a lot of discussions about how those different devices interact together, and research projects related to not necessarily TENS units specifically, but how wearables, interoperability, AR, VR, how all these things play together.
Adler Archer, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Sorry, I don't know if we get 2 questions, so this is my second one. Okay. So it's less of a question, actually, I guess more of an idea that I'm going to pitch that kind of relates to what we're talking about. So I teach digital health innovation and regulatory science classes, and I'm the PI for a program called Hexsite. And I think I mentioned it last time, Anne, when we were in Philly. But we have clinicians from across the health system. They come and pitch medical software ideas. We take the best 5 and we pair them with an MBA student, graduate engineering student, and a graphic designer. We train them for 16 weeks in design thinking, project management. We bring in IP lawyers to talk to them. One of the issues I have is that my MBA students don't come to Hopkins to run health tech startups, though. So they graduate and go on and do other stuff. And then we have this gap where we send the clinicians back to clinic, and we don't have people to run the startup. And so in this instance, I'm thinking with the VA, is it possible to have a similar model and plug a veteran into the startup design process and then have them run the startup using the idea that the clinician has come up with?
I think Ryan actually answered that question for me. We generally say yes and then try to figure out how to make it work. So.
Okay. I can help you design it. I published in the British Medical Journal on our program, so I'm happy to work with you on that.
I think there's, that's great. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Adler, as well. But I think if nothing else, over the past 2 days, we've all come to consensus that none of us are doing this by ourselves. And it's really important for us to be working, of course, across the VA as an organization, but also into the community with industry and academia, other government agencies, which you see represented up here as well, nonprofit organizations. In order for this to truly revolutionize healthcare in the way that all of us, I think, believe, and I know already so many of you believe as well, it's going to take all of us. So I'd love to continue to explore those types of models with you. Caitlin has a question on the front. You could just come on stage and ask your question.
Thanks. This question is mostly for Ryan. So when it comes to, Susan talked earlier about don't forget about the content when you're looking at all these different research articles. When it comes to like regulatory science, why is it important to look at these devices and the software together? Why are they not looked at separately so that then the software, because that's the part that's really impacting their health, why are they typically looked at together? And is there a method of separating those to make it easier for software to be agnostic, regardless of the technology that comes on the market?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And first I'll give you the FDA answer, then I'll try to do a little better. Our standard answer is, well, it depends. And the reason I say that, though, is because like how much you can separate the hardware and software depends a lot on what you're actually doing with it. So for instance, if we go to, say, like clinician-facing, if we're talking about a headset that you're using in an operating room and you're registering medical images to a patient, well, the sensor performance, the image quality, that's going to matter a lot. So and beyond that, there can be corrections and things like that applied within the software that impacts how the hardware performs. So you don't really get an accurate picture of the device if you just look at a single component. You have to look at the entire thing. Mm-hmm. So that's generally what you have to do. But that a little bit what I was kind of teasing at is if we can get to a point as an entire community where we have a better understanding of the specifications and how to report those, then I think then you could start thinking about, well, okay, this headset and this headset actually do perform pretty similar, and then maybe it's more of the software. I'll also mention that there are, of course, through the FDA, there's like software as a medical device. So but even then, it tends to incorporate everything. So on the simplest case, you can imagine maybe like minimum specifications or something like that, a spot that we could hope to get to eventually. But that's kind of why things generally are viewed that way is so what software they've developed it on, the hardware they've used, and since there can be a lot of details and what's going on with those two that ends up impacting the final performance. But yeah, I think that's a great goal of somewhere it would be nice to get to, so that then when there is a change in hardware, it's not too big of a challenge for a company to move on to the updated hardware.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
As we all know, to become a veteran, you first have to be in the military and be honorably discharged. And I know it's the military is like a astronomical amount of people when they get discharged to become a veteran. But I want to focus on one area of the military that comes up for me with all of this, that maybe with a suggestion could help in the area of work that I do with benefits and claims. The section with the PEB board, Physical Evaluation Board, when an active duty member gets injured in service and before they get their discharge, they get a medical board, and then they get determined how they're going to get discharged, whether they accept severance pay, or if they're fortunate enough, if they come across somebody that they get information from on the outside world, how to navigate through before they sign their discharge, how to navigate through for benefits. So my question is, or suggestion, can something like this down the road be brought into the military in just that one piece in the Physical Evaluation Board for people that are up in front of a PEB board, because this would so much help all the active duty people that have no awareness, because they're not given any counsel really to speak of. It's kind of like it's a revolving circle door with it, because then when they get out, they come to people like myself, my organization, or other VSOs to file a claim, when it all could have been taken care of in the service.
Well, I think there's a couple ways to address your problem, or your issue, your question. One is, I think, getting ahead of the curve with coming up with systems that help onboard and offboard people who are coming into an enterprise. And so that we can use simulations and virtual environments and connectivity with other peers as part of an onboarding process, and also as I'm not sure what the offboarding phrase is, but transitions. I think we can also, because we can measure physical movement functionally, not just what's your grip strength, but what can you do, and also emotional and cognitive. I think are the new ways we're going to have to evaluate someone to see if they've had a service-related injury, for example, in a much more precise way, and be able to do it culturally and age appropriately. I think the technology that's being developed here will come up with more functional evaluation for both onboarding and for discharging.
Thank you.
This is a great question. All right, with that, any final comments from any of you? From the Peanut Gallery?
I want to thank the audience.
Absolutely.
I mean, this has been a fun group to be with.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you guys so much for your engagement. We'll clap for you.